Hello, this is Bob Banner, and in front of me is Richard Moore, the organizer of the Phoenix Gathering. We're in Ecuador, and some basic questions, Richard. Why did you think of this, or why did you want to do this particular gathering in Ecuador?
Well, ever since I learned about different kinds of dialogue processes, I've been thinking about where can one apply them? And it's been applied in communities, for local issues. It's been applied in corporations for team building and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, some kind of more of a conference thing where you're inviting people, like you would go to a conference, only using dialogue. What could that do to it? Could that make it more effective? So when I ran into Sergio's network, suddenly there was an infrastructure in which it would be possible to gather people, in terms of inviting people, getting them to come. So here was this opportunity to try out the process ideas. So I thought, well, let's just do an experiment, kind of like looking for the 10th planet or something, where you said, okay, we're going to need the big telescope, and we're going to need this, and and so just all the conditions to create the possibility of amazing outcomes.
But your focus was for social change agents to come to this particular gathering. You wanted to change the world somehow. That was the focus of the group.
Yeah. Although, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't overemphasize. It turned out to be all social change agents. See? I'm not even necessarily sure that's the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would have hoped to have more people that came with questions, saying, gee, what can we do? But everybody came with answers. Mm-hmm. And that makes it a lot harder, because you get kind of a competitive thing going. So in other words, it wasn't really that I wanted to change. I wanted people who wanted to talk about what can we do with these big issues. And I was hoping that there would be, I figured if you had one that knew about ecology and one that knew about banking, that'd be enough. You didn't need 3 experts on every subject. Mm-hmm. So I would have been happy to have some, I don't know who, but people who come more, well, gee, what can we do? And we've tried some things in our factory and it didn't work. Does anybody have any more? Asking, I think, might have enriched it a bit. So it was an experiment. And it had to be self-selecting, since we couldn't pay people to come. Mm-hmm. And so it turned out to be what it was, which, in other words, I set up certain parameters, and then the universe took over and made it be a certain way. And that's part of the experiment, is when you try to do an experiment, what problems you run into and what kind of people show up and da-da-da. So in every way it was an experiment, the invitational process as well as the design process and all that.
Had you seen dynamic facilitation before to get a real grasp of what it could do?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
Can you say a few more words about dynamic facilitation? Why?
Well, let me say a little bit. I will. And the way I found out more is that I first read about it, and then I went on a tour and visited people in Eugene, and stayed with them for a few days and quizzed them. Went for walks with them and tell me all of, when do you use it, when don't you use it, what other methods do you use? And then I went up and stayed with Jim and Jean, on a couple occasions for 2 or 3 or 4 days, and had long conversations and debates with Jim, that kind of stuff. So, and then I actually took the training to learn how to dynamic facilitate with Deanna and her husband. And then I there was an activist group I was with, and they were talking about having a meeting, and I said, well, let's facilitate. So I actually went to Brighton and did facilitate the meeting. And it did work. Like they had an organizational issue, and they had a management crisis. They weren't really being organized. And there was this one guy who said, well, I came to this meeting, but I'm really about ready to leave the group. I'm about fed up with this group. And what that led to is toward the end, he said, well, I would do this one, I would do that. And it was kind of, well, it got to the point there had been things said where actually I could feel what the energy was, and I said to him, well, are you saying that you would take on a 6-month project of whipping this organization into shape? Well, yeah. you sure you're ready to do that? Yeah. And then I said, would everybody be willing to support him in that? And they said, yeah. And, okay, action items. That's how the breakthroughs occur.
Uh-huh.
And, but that was 12 people, or maybe less, maybe 10 people, who were in an organization together, who wanted the organization to succeed, agreed that things weren't proceeding as smoothly as they could. See? So there, you can, with dynamic facilitation, you can actually count on it being well worth the time spent and possibly total solution breakthroughs. But with 25 people, all of whom think they have all the answers, and that everybody else is thinking about it wrong, you know, and it's harder. And also the venue, and there wasn't as much, it was too easy to go off and make coffee all the time and stuff, you know, and walk away. And so it's very difficult for the process to do what it's capable of doing. However, I think the other processes we use, which turn, you know, toward more later in the week, and the things converge, it's not clear to me that those could have happened if we hadn't gone through what we had gone through.
Yeah.
But I am thinking that I'd want to have a more flexible approach to process. So the experiment here was, let's see what DF can do. And in fact, we had to vary from that, and that's good. So we had emergent energy. So next time I'd look at a lot of different ways of starting it. Have a lot more small group stuff and near the beginning.
Are there facilitation processes that do incorporate a lot of different modes when difficult situations arise that you know?
Oh, well, see, there's a whole industry of facilitators, just like there's an industry of yoga teachers. And it comes down, a good facilitator is going to have a suite of practices they know, things they can do. It would depend on the group. They'd look at the group, what are you trying to accomplish, how much time do we have, what buy-in do we or don't we have from management for this. You know, they find out the situation, and they just come in and do the same thing every time.
In your touring different activist groups who were, that you were using the dynamic facilitation, what was the most successful, or what really worked? I mean, you used the word worked, so can you clarify? I mean, I know you mentioned it earlier on, but what were some other ones? Especially like in Eugene, was there a lot of activists at each other's throats, or? Well,
no. When I went to those places, what I did, I would be going on what I call a book tour. See, so I would be ostensibly going to give talks on my book, and in fact, I might even sell a couple books. But what it really was is an excuse to meet people, find out what they're doing, and learn things, and talk about my ideas. So what I would do is I'd be staying with these people who are facilitators, quizzing them about how they've used it, what success they've had, what failures they've had, and taking their word for it. I wasn't sitting in the back while they did facilitation, particularly. It was more, it was like interviewing them, only without a camera.
I wonder if you were involved with the governance working group here. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what some of the emergent perspectives were of that group, and how you see that those sorts of discussions being applied in the real world.
Well, I mean, the core of my ideas are about direct democracy, grassroots direct democracy. And so really what happened is I presented my ideas about that to the group. And since the focus of the group was governance, I mean, people went along with it. There wasn't really, nobody else said, well, no, I think governments should work this way. We didn't really have a controversy about it. It seemed, oh, that's reasonable enough. And it went along with localization and stuff.
So what kind of principles emerged for good local governance, or good grassroots democracy? What were the key principles that you thought emerged from the discussions of the group?
Well, like I said, I pretty much presented my view. So it didn't emerge from the discussion that much. what emerged from the discussion is they kind of agreed with that, given that they were a group just talking about governance. If it had been in the bigger group, I don't think there would have been much agreement.
Can you give us an example of where local governance has worked? I know you've spoken about Puerto Alegre. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can, but here we're like totally duplicating existing footage, but I don't mind. I think the principal place to look really is Cuba, because Cuba has their actual governance is based on starting at the local level, discussing the issues locally, and then selecting a slate to go on to the next level. And with the understanding that the slate, it's choosing friends. These are ordinary people. They aren't politicians. There's not a campaign run. It's more like if we hear, we might, who maybe send you two guys. You guys willing to go to Quito and represent, and tell them what Vilcabamba wants? Because you're kind of articulate, and it's not that you have the most radical ideas, the least radical ideas, but you could represent what we've all agreed to. So I imagine you'd select people on the basis of can they express themselves well, et cetera, rather than are they promising to get you a chicken coop, Because then they go off and they do their job, and then they come back and they take their job back. It's like they get days off to go to Havana. It's that kind of thing. See? So there you can actually see a bottom-up process in action. On the other hand, when I look at any of these things, I say, what process do they use? How do they dialogue in their local bloc? Is it the loudest people kind of dominate and everybody goes along with it? Or do they really have an intelligent way of dialoguing? See, what all this goes back to is that in indigenous societies, of course, a lot of what they do is like it's all culture based. It's like they have the myths and all this. They don't reinvent themselves every generation. But when they do have decisions to make, what shall our tribe do? Then they do have listening-based processes that everybody gets to participate in, and so they actually have a different culture that say, well, oh gee, we got a problem to solve. Well, where's an elder where we can sit down and have a circle, rather than let's fight or I'm going to sue you, So that culture of just expecting the way you solve conflicts is through a process of finding something that works for everybody. What I want to do is recreate that culture. And the challenge, of course, is that was uni-ethic, unicultural, and with a tradition of dialogue, and with all of that, and with everybody understanding that the community is the most important thing. That's starting point. And the worst thing is banishment. So within that context, things were done by agreement. So here we have a situation where you have today things are multi-ethnic, multicultural, and people could just say, well, I don't like it here, I'm going to leave. So banishment doesn't have and everybody doesn't agree that the community is the most important thing.
Yeah, you have neighborhoods of people who are just so isolated and they stay inside their houses.
Yeah, and they say, what do you mean community? I just want that guy to quit using his weed whacker. That's all I need. So we don't have at all the nurturing nest. But so the idea is to try to use what worked as a cultural paradigm for making decisions in, say, hunter-gatherer societies. How can we recover that cultural paradigm, given that all the things, the technology and mobility and all the things? And my feeling about it is there isn't any inherent reason why not. It's not in the nature of technology that one cannot agree. But what is true is that the 6,000-year history of civilization totally abandoned all those cultural forms so that hierarchy could function more effectively. And so that's the barrier to recovering a peaceful culture. It's not the way our modern, it's not the economics, the technology, and mobility. It's unfortunate history. At least I'm hoping that.
The loss, in other words,
I
the
could
loss
be
of the
wrong.
cultural norm.
I could be wrong, but I don't see any other hope.
But do you think relocalization will push people into becoming more communitarians and more focused on wanting community and making more collective decisions?
Well, I can see I can interpret two meanings from that question. One meaning is, if because of peak oil we are forced to turn to our neighbors for aid, that's one kind of, if relocalization happens. The other meaning of your question would be, if a community is engaged in relocalization as a project, like in Boulder, is that going to bring them more into community? Which was your question?
The latter.
Okay. So, yes and no. I think part of the answer to that question is, I think the most binding thing there is among humans is working together, which might include fighting, like soldiers. Like some of the biggest bonds are between soldiers, because you're out there depending on each other to come through and cover you when you're running, so that when people are working together, depending on each other to do things, like with me and Sergio and Brian and Leonardo, as we were arranging that. Once you get into it, see, then, and we were each doing, and then if Sergio tells me, I need to know the product number of those tapes because I can order them with my credit card tomorrow, well, I'm not going to let him down. I'll do whatever it takes to get that product number to him. So there's this mutual, it almost becomes embarrassing not to keep up your end. And plus all kinds of other forces, positive bonds and things. So I think working together is much better than praying together or doing yoga together. It's doing projects together. And so in that sense, if relocalization is happening, that's going to build bonds and networks and trust and dependencies and things, On the other hand, another aspect of it is, and I've been talking to Michael about it, is that he's finding that you reach a kind of, there's a curve of, okay, a lot of people got interested, we got a bunch of sign-ups, a bunch of people came to the potluck, and it got better the next month. And you sort of peak, and you're not penetrating more of the community. And so there, the idea of bringing in the right dialogue processes, and it could be wisdom councils, it could be something else, so that you're building a sense of community in the dialogue sense, understanding each other's sense, and at the same time you're trying to have a content focus of local sustainability. Those two can complement one another. See, rather than one leading to the other, doing both, I think is the thing that it gives you content and process and things to work on and positive outcomes. It's not about, shall we send a protest bus to, I hate protests and stuff. I think it's got to be, because that's like begging. Oh, please don't abuse me so much. Please can I have some more corn, things you can do for yourself.
So what you're talking about is like a project that you and Michael will be working on in the near future?
I hope so. See, he's as far as I haven't surveyed the whole world, but as far as I'm concerned, he's got to be one of the leading examples of relocalization. And yet, they have done nothing with process. That's not part of relocalization. Other than, you put out brochures and call meetings and just do normal things. But the actual idea of having people with opposing views, people who don't see any point in relocalization, getting together with others, and then having breakthroughs where they all agree they want to do relocalization, see? That's what I would like to bring to that picture. So what I want to do with him, what I've already talked to him about it, is I'd like to learn more about what's going on in Boulder, not just with relocalization, but what else is going on in Boulder. How many people are interested, why aren't they interested? And what I like to do is identify, in Boulder or any other community I was trying to work with, what is a divisive issue that exists right now in the community, where all it would take to solve it is agreement. Now, if the problem is we need $20 billion to save a rainforest, well, I'm not talking about that. But if the left side of the track and the right side of the track could only agree, then they could go ahead and either put in the rapid transit system or open the ski run, they're not sure which, If there's a place where there's high divisiveness, important to the community, then this kind of a process with, say, only 12 people would work beautifully. You can't judge it by all the problems we had here. And so then if that happened, then they'd be saying, wow, we solved that. And people would be hugging who formerly hated each other. And they'd be thinking, well, geez, well, why don't we solve that other problem too? And so then you could get enthusiasm in the community for a process. Whereas in some cases where they're community and they've gotten them to agree to do a wisdom council or whatever, they do it, and it was interesting, and it's kind of good stuff. But there was no reason for the community to stand up and take notice. Whereas if it was solving some long-standing water issue or logging issue or health issue, and it worked for everybody, then they say, wow, that is powerful stuff, rather than just an interesting event.
Well, it's like that one section in the chapter of your book that talks about having all those various diverse people. I mean, the fundamentalists and the right wing and the left wing, and to come out with that common statement of "we the people," it just blew me away. That I think that was Mark Satin's conference or something.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was the one who documented it. I know the guy who organized that in Ashland. Joseph McCormick. He made a video called Democracy in America. I think, well, I'm sorry, something about democracy, and he refers to de Tocqueville and Democracy in America in it.
We only have a few more minutes. Do you want to summarize that, or go off on something you want to talk about to this specific camera right now?
Summarize what?
Oh, what happened in Ashland? The
Oh, you mean the Rogue Valley?
yes.
Well, that was not the thing that Kalamazoo, Michigan, is where one of those institutes, I forget the name of the institute, Fetzer Institute. Joseph organized, but the Fetzer Institute did the facilitation, and it was very interesting. And they did something like we could have done. Is each person who was there, they said, okay, we're going to walk you from this side of the room to that side, and then put down a marker each time some new thing changed in your life about your mission. You know, your experiences that made you like when I quit going to church when I was 12, or I was radicalized by the Vietnam War in 1962, and sort of show you how you developed to where you are. And when everybody did that, they started off like, suddenly they didn't see each other as the other anymore. They always, oh, wow, that's why you're a flaming radical. I see. And then said, well, that's why you're a flaming conservative. Oh, well, let's talk. So they really did a very good job of opening up dialogue and getting people to see each other as humans.
So there was like a common history of the...
Well, no, the common history that we are all people who have had a history.
Okay.
Not that they had things in common in their history, but now I can see why you feel that way. It's not so I just thought you were dumb. There are actually reasonable people who can disagree with me. That's interesting. But, yeah, you must be out of time then.
One question is just, I don't know if you have time to record this. I'm just curious about it.
What's the limit? Are we running out of disc? No. You haven't had breakfast.
We had about 25 minutes, so there's probably 35, but I just wanted to go about 25.
Okay,
so.
no, you're the boss.
I'm just curious about Wexford. What do you, that's your community. That's where you live now. Are any of these sorts of issues and discussions happening in Wexford? Are you part of them?
It is really strange, but I haven't been able to get any energy around doing anything in Wexford. And it's kind of an anomaly. I believe in local stuff, but I don't do any local stuff. So I don't know whether that's good or bad. It's like, you know how they say a prophet is not recognized in their own village? Well, maybe a converse of that is an activist doesn't activate in his own village. I don't know.
Well, you also have to go with where your energy is. I mean, if you're not into that local area, who knows? If you go to Boulder, you might really, really enjoy working with Michael. But then, on the other hand, if your passion is global,
well, I really think that my niche, ultimately, to the extent I have one, is more what you would call a consultant. See, because I can go into a situation and my contribution is usually going to be along the lines of, well, if you added this to what you're doing, it'd be more effective. Let's say I'm right, and let's say they buy into it, then there are probably lots and lots of people who could do what I suggested doing better than I could. So I'm really, my career really has been, it's like, I'm like a designer, system engineer, systems person, like at Apple Computer. It's in the advanced research group, which is really looking into new technologies and things like that. So it's kind of bringing system understanding and skills to analyzing problems. See, because I'll tell you one thing that maybe I think is different about me than most people I know is that, or most change agents I know, is, it could be exaggerating, but I found usually you find somebody, they've devoted their career to a certain solution path. Like, well, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say that for Bruce, he really is into banking and da-da-da and how it can be used. And given any problem, it's how can we finance it? It's always going to be the answer. Oh, how can we finance it? It's always banking. I didn't start off with any. I mean, also just to study the first of all, how does the world work, and keep tracing back, and learning about history. And so then I came to the conclusion about how civilization is nothing but the story of evolving hierarchies. In some sense, at first approximation. It wasn't because I started off being an anarchist. I looked at the problem. And then in terms of solution, well, gee, I thought, for a lot, like everybody else, we need election reform. We need media reform. We need better debates. No, those don't work. Oh, third party. No, that doesn't work. Keep checking things and then reading. You think a third party is a good idea? Well, don't you dare tell me that until you've read the whole history of the Farmers Alliance. See, you don't need to experiment with it. It's been done, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. And so, by a process of elimination, I came to the point that democracy can only exist face to face, and that only democracy can avoid usurpation. There's no in between. You can't say representative democracy. You have democracy or you don't. Representative democracy isn't. So it wasn't that I started off an anarchist. It wasn't that I started off a localist. It's I came to those positions by studying the problem. And there could be a lot of other people like that too, but I don't usually run into them. They have this just flavor that everything's got to be community currency, or everything's got to be new energy, or everything, the solution is the thing rather than the problem.
Well, thank you, Richard, for talking into the camera.
Okay.
You want to give a website or also the title of your book, Escaping the Matrix?
Yeah, it's Escaping the Matrix, How We the People Can Change the World, as opposed to Escaping the Matrix, Finding Yourself in Christ or something, which is the other one you get when you do Escaping the Matrix. And then I've got lots of websites, but the one that is my leading website right now, I'd say, is called governourselves.com, which is a blog. And it's really a summary. I say a paragraph, and then I've got 27 different websites or quotes or articles to go to. So it gets to all my other websites.
And Waking the Phoenix?
WakingThePhoenix.org is the one for this particular gathering. Which it's an interesting website, but it isn't a Richard website. It can't be, because now the group owns it. I don't know what I'm going to do now, because whatever I used to be able to do whatever I want on it, and either it appealed to people and they came, or it didn't appeal to people and they didn't come. But now I have a responsibility to have it reflect the group energy. And that's difficult. And I tell you, it pissed me off that some people they're all into these non-disclosure. You can't show anything unless you. What they don't understand is how much work it is to try to turn something into a media production. And then to say, well, after you do all that work, then I'll let you know whether you can use it.
Well, on that happy note.
I won't name any names. I won't name any names.
That's why you didn't hear me saying, I don't want any of my stuff used.